Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's FDD media call. My name is Joe Doherty. I'm Senior Director of Communications at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a nonpartisan research institute focused on national security and foreign policy. We're grateful that you've taken the time to join us for a timely discussion today on two key items. The first is the Houthi attack last night, in which the terrorist group launched an Iran-provided drone at the American consulate in Tel Aviv that resulted in at least one death and several injuries, and what appears to be a tipping point in the Israel-Hamas war. Our experts will address both of those points today. On the call for today, Jonathan Schanzer, FDD's Senior Vice President for Research. He is an expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the author of several books on the Middle East, including Gaza Conflict 2021, Hamas, Israel, and 11 Days of War, which was the first book published about the war. Richard Goldberg, FDD Senior Advisor and expert on U.S.-Israel relations and U.S. security issues. He's a former director for countering Iranian weapons of mass destruction for the White House National Security Council. And David Daoud, FDD Senior Fellow, focused on Lebanon and Hezbollah, particularly on Hezbollah's strategies and tactics since the Hamas invasion on October 7th. Some quick housekeeping. Today's conversation is on the record. We'll share the transcript and the recording of today's call, hopefully within 24 hours, as soon as we can get those turned around for you. Today's run of show, real quickly. First, we'll hear from Jonathan, who will set the scene, followed by Richard, and then David, and then we'll open it up to your questions. During the Q&A portion, you may submit your questions via the chat feature, or you may use the raise hand feature, in which case we'll let you know when you've been unmuted and you can ask your questions. Okay, let's get right to it. Jonathan, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks to all of you for joining, and thanks to my colleagues for being on as well. So very quickly, I'll try to move through both of these as quickly as possible so we can get to the analysis of my colleagues and then on to your Q&A. The first, just to briefly unpack what happened last night and the way the Israelis are looking at it today. As we all know, there was a drone strike last night. I think there was some confusion early on. Watching Israeli media, it was even unclear whether the drone hit a building or whether it exploded in the middle of the air without actually having intersected with anything solid. I think we've now gotten a better sense of exactly what happened. It certainly does appear that the former Israeli embassy, now consulate in Tel Aviv, was in fact the target. There were, I think, several errors made on the Israeli part in terms of defense. They were not able to intercept it, nor was there a siren to alert the Israeli public that it had gotten through. This is the first drone to make it into Tel Aviv, as far as we understand, since this war began, so nearly 9 months, where Tel Aviv has been an impenetrable fortress. Now that appears to have changed. That is a significant psychological thing for the Israelis, who I think have been operating under the assumption that Tel Aviv was off limits or that it would not be hit. That has changed, obviously, and so I think Israelis are grappling with that and what it means. It is certainly, I think, there is some psychological value to this for the Houthis, who have obviously claimed responsibility. I would just maybe add one more thing here, which I think is perhaps the most important takeaway, which is that the Israelis have long understood, I think, that this is a much wider war. I think the attack last night, the Houthis' ability to strike in the heart of Tel Aviv with a drone while there's escalation going on in the north, which we'll talk about momentarily, while there is an ongoing war in Gaza, while Shiite militias continue to be active in Iraq and Syria. This is a multi-front war that is being waged by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Israelis have had really no doubt about this for quite some time, but I do think that as the Gaza war winds down, and I'll talk about that in a moment, there is very much the potential for a widening escalation across multiple jurisdictions. And I think that's really the concern right now that I want to begin to unpack. So let me move over into what we're seeing out of Gaza. In Gaza, I think we're seeing signs that Hamas is on the verge of defeat. We're seeing, the targeted strikes that Israel has carried out, including one that increasingly does appear to have taken out Mohammed Deif. We certainly can't say that right now with 100% accuracy, but when you speak to Israelis right now, they are increasingly convinced that they were successful in taking out Hamas's top military leader the other day in that strike on the sands of Mawasi, as this area is known in Gaza, along the coast. But even if the Israelis didn't get him, we have seen a larger number of significant senior Hamas officials taken out with pinpoint intelligence that the Israeli Shin Bet has been able to acquire. And really, in just about every major battle that has taken place, and even some of the minor battles, it appears that Israel is getting the best of Hamas. This has been the report that I've been getting on the ground. And that, essentially we're watching the Israelis grind down through kind of a war of attrition almost, the Hamas fighters that seemingly have no fear of engaging, day after day. But I think the most important element to the tide turning has been Israel's control that it took more than a month ago over what's known as the Philadelphia Corridor. This is this area right along the border of the Gaza Strip. And below there, we believe there is a significant tunnel infrastructure that the Israelis have also taken control over. The significance here, of course, is that these are the supply lines for Hamas, for the ability for the group to allow for its fighters to leave and to come back, but more importantly, for the weapon systems that have been brought in, including ammunition, likely coming from the outside, whether from Libya or Iran. And there is some, I think, speculation about where exactly those weapons are coming from. But it's not rocket science, folks. When you cut off the supply lines of your enemy is weaker and more susceptible to defeat. And that does appear to be what's going on. So now comes the question of what happens if Israel is, in fact, on the cusp of victory. I think there's two things to note here. One is there could be a ceasefire, but this will not be necessarily in Israel's interest. If they're really on the cusp of defeating Hamas, the last thing they want to do is to give Hamas an opportunity to regroup and to rebuild and to reset. They will want to finish off Hamas, and then that does, of course, leave the Israeli leadership with a tough gambit of not recovering hostages, but winning the war. These are the sorts of things that I'm sure are being weighed right now if the Israelis do feel that they're getting close. There is one way out that I have discerned, which would be to try to broker an agreement. Whether Hamas agrees to it or not is another story, but that would see the expulsion of the Hamas leadership and the return of hostages. That would be sort of the John Grisham ending, if you will, for this war for the Israelis. Whether that's feasible or not, I don't know. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that either Hamas does not agree to the terms, or they just don't want to, or the Israelis decide they're not going to negotiate. Then comes the question of what happens when Israel finally knocks off Hamas in the course of a battle. There, I think it's safe to say we will see more escalation from the north. This has been the role that Hezbollah has adopted, and I'm sure David and Rich will tell you more about this. They have adopted a position that they are going to keep laying fire down on Israel so long as Israel is trying to defeat Hamas. So then the first scenario here is that perhaps there is a limited war in southern Lebanon, which is really what I hear mostly from my Lebanese contacts and friends, that there is a hope, or perhaps even an expectation, that the fighting would only take place in southern Lebanon. I think the likelihood of that is very low. I cannot recall a time in the Middle East where both sides, in a gentleman's agreement, decided that they were going to limit the jurisdiction of their fighting, especially when both sides in this case have weapons that could far exceed the trajectory here of just that southern Lebanon, perhaps northern Israel battle zone. So that then leads us to the question of, would there be a bigger war? And this, of course, is the thing that many of us have been concerned about since Hezbollah began opening fire on Israel on October 8th, because we know that Hezbollah has 200,000 rockets and they have precision-guided munitions and they have an army that has fought and trained alongside Russia and Iran. This is a powerful army, equivalent in power to that of a mid-sized European country by all estimates that we hear out of the region. And so if that does occur, then the question is, how far does that war go? And there you could see, for example, in Israel, you could see tall towers falling. You could see large numbers of casualties as the result of mass casualty attacks carried out by Hezbollah. That would, of course, lead to an escalation on Israel's part, which could then put Hezbollah in a position where it too is on the verge of defeat because Israel will pull out the big guns, so to speak. It's at that point that you would potentially see Iran deploy more of its proxies in a more intense fashion, thereby triggering what we have been calling the Ring of Fire, where you've got Shiite militias from Iraq and Syria, as well as Yemen and Lebanon itself, pouring in fire to try to halt the decline of their most powerful proxy, Hezbollah. These are sort of the big buckets that we look at when we look at the potential escalation ladder. But it's interesting that we look at these now when we consider that Israel may be on the verge of victory. In other words, there is no simple sort of extrication of Israel from this conflict. We are deeper into something that is more regional in nature. I think that needs to be understood. That was certainly underscored last night with the Houthi drone attack, and it's something that we continue to watch. So no easy answers, no easy outs, but certainly a lot of permutations. And I'll end there and look forward to the analysis from my colleagues.
Jonathan, thank you. Let's turn it right over to Rich now.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Jonathan covered a lot of ground. A few points on last night's strike, and then on what's next to come in Gaza, and hopefully stir some more questions as well during the Q&A. On last night, I'm personally pretty surprised by the extended range that is being demonstrated by the Houthis here. This is a drone that I think most publications put around 2,000 kilometers in max range. If you look at the likely scenarios here, and obviously the intel is going to be telling folks where they think this drone may have originated from and how it got to Tel Aviv. But if it went sort of straight up the Red Sea and across Sinai and up the Mediterranean coast and then popped over from the west into Tel Aviv, which is sort of what it looks like, that's probably about 2,500 kilometers. So this is a pretty impressive extended range capability that the Houthis have thanks to the Iranians, and they're clearly continuing to update this drone with the conformal fuel tank, maybe lessening the payload of what it might otherwise be to be able to get the extended range, and clearly able to penetrate Israeli air defense, albeit with this caveat. This is not a swarm of drones coming through. It's not an armada of drones, if you will. This is one low-flying, sort of slow-moving drone that's able to get through on its own, it appears. Would that happen if there were 5 of them? Would that happen if there were 10 of them? Or air defense would pick that up at that point because of the numbers involved? These are questions I think the Israelis are asking themselves, but clearly there's going to need to be some sort of way of the Israelis addressing these gaps in air defense in the coming days. And that's already been a conversation point, as you've seen some drone penetrations from Hezbollah and from Iraq and Syria militias as well, and certainly after this strike. And the last piece I would say is there's going to have to be some sort of a response option for the Israelis here. If Yemen is going to be the source of future extended attacks, even if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, which may lead to some sort of de-escalation on the northern front as well, which is obviously the Biden administration's hope, there is still this demonstration of capability that's already come from Iraq and now being demonstrated from Yemen. The Israelis will have to think through creative options for their own extended range strike capabilities to respond potentially, and not just against the Houthis, but of course their sponsor, the parent company, Iran, and various assets that the Iranians have on the ground, and they're providing to the Houthis to help them with these capabilities and strikes. As far as Gaza, obviously we have Prime Minister Netanyahu expected in next week, big address to Congress, a lot of questions of what will come next if we lay out the future of a ceasefire or, as Jon put it, the potential for an actual military victory as the trend lines are looking. What are the next phases? What are the big questions that are going to come ahead? I don't know if Netanyahu is going to address these, but I think these are going to have to be things that we grapple with very soon. Questions of PA involvement. This has obviously been controversial since the beginning of this conflict, with the potential of the Palestinian Authority taking over in some way security control or administrative control of Gaza. Palestinian Authority has a lot of problems, as we know, pay for slay program, incitement against Israel, the corruption of the government there, the mistrust on the streets, the PA security forces not able to do its job in the West Bank. Why would they be trusted in Gaza? So a lot of questions there to grapple with. Will there be a Qatari role in the redevelopment, the reconstruction of Gaza, after we know the Qatari role and their partnership, their sponsorship, their enablement of Hamas led to October 7th continues to help Hamas even today? Will the United States back that, or will we be pushing for no Qatari role, no Turkish role as well? Anybody who has sponsored Hamas being cut off from a major role or any role in what comes next in Gaza. And then the future of UNRWA, I think, is also up for grabs here. What will the structures look like inside of Gaza as you're transitioning to some post-Hamas rule? Will there be an empowerment of UNRWA still on the ground to have wide swaths of the civilian administrative state under its control, even though we know it has enabled, has close ties, has sponsored Hamas, does not have a mission to move people into a post-refugee status, into self-sufficiency, self-reliance, which you would want in a new government? Or will we be looking at alternative structures that are non-UNRWA in nature? And if we go down that path, could that be applied to other areas as well where UNRWA operates, most specifically in the Palestinian Authority areas, but also other areas of Levant as well? We can talk about that in Q&A, but I think these are issues that are now more imminent in front of us than they were a few months ago. They haven't been grappled with all that publicly. There's positioning. We know where the Israeli government is on some of these. We know where different elements of Congress are. We know where the Biden administration has said certain things. Now we're getting to decision points here, and now it's going to matter. We're reaching forks in the road. And if we go down certain roads where UNRWA is still in charge, the PA is put in charge, the Qataris are playing a role in reconstruction, we may be simply laying the seeds to another October 7th down the line. The last piece I would say in decision-making is the role of Israeli security presence in Gaza. This is a factor, by the way, playing out within the ceasefire talks itself. Hamas obviously demands, as part of a ceasefire, that as part of this declaration that the war is over, the IDF is pulling all of its forces out of Gaza. And there's been talk of what would that mean? The perimeter road between Israel and Gaza, on the Gaza side, will the IDF pull out of that? It's used right now for logistics support for Israeli operations. The Netzarim corridor that cuts Gaza in half, south and north, this east-west corridor, critical corridor right now used to plan operations, to be able to prevent fighters from going north to south and be able to conduct maneuvers, whether in the north or in the south, very easily. And most specifically, most importantly, probably, where Jon touched on, the Philadelphia corridor, this Egypt-Gaza border area. There's no way, in my view, that at this point you could trust the Egyptians to handle the security there. That's going to take years of rebuilding trust in Egypt and understanding that they will actually try to fight smuggling and prevent tunneling at that border. Absent some other party that we could have full trust in, that would have the support of the U.S. taxpayer and U.S. Congress to actually back, I can't think of one right now. I don't think there's support for U.S. troops on the ground. I wouldn't support that, which means the IDF becomes the one party that can responsibly and accountably prevent Hamas from exploiting that corridor in the future. If the IDF gives up that corridor, again, that spells potential disaster down the line.
Richard, thank you. David, over to you from the Lebanon perspective.
So I'm going to focus mostly on the drone and what this means in a broader regional context. Why did this happen now, right? It kind of seems out of left field for the Houthis, who've been focusing on international shipping, to suddenly try to turn not just to Eilat, but to the Israeli heartland. And we've seen several things happening in this regional context. First of all, the Israeli ongoing war of attrition with Hezbollah that started when Hezbollah began attacking on October 8th. The Israelis have been making Hezbollah really hurt. They've been killing senior commanders in the Radwan force and other elements of Hezbollah's organizational infrastructure, demonstrating really good intelligence capabilities. They're able to know who these guys are and able to find them. This is going to have a slow erosion process on Hezbollah over time as this war of attrition continues. But Hezbollah's ability to respond directly is limited. In the sense that Hezbollah wants to keep this conflict at this low-level boil. They don't want to have the war that Jonathan was mentioning, which is an Israeli incursion into South Lebanon, at least not now. This is something they're preserving for the future when they're in a better position, when Lebanon is able to take more of a proverbial beating, when their regional partners are in a better position. Perhaps Iran has a nuclear umbrella. So right now they want to keep this at a low boil. So if they were to respond in kind to these Israeli attacks on senior Hezbollah officials, it would risk this escalation. Example, if this drone had come from Lebanon and hit Tel Aviv, the rules of the game that have been operating between Hezbollah and Israel since October 8th would change such that now you've opened up perhaps targeting into Lebanon, into South Beirut. And once you've hit Tel Aviv once, you can't really back down as Hezbollah. You look weak. So you're going to have to keep heading Tel Aviv, and that puts the potential for escalation into this wider war or full conflict at a much higher pace. They're trying to avoid that. The other element, so Hezbollah has the capabilities to do this, but perhaps not the willingness to do it now. The alternative reason for this is the potential killing of Mohammed Daoud. This hasn't been confirmed by Hamas. It hasn't been confirmed fully by the Israelis, but it seems like it's very unlikely that he survived. Hamas can theoretically do this now, right? They're already engaged in a full-on conflict with the Israelis. There's not much further that the Israeli punishment that the Israelis can do to them if they were to hit Tel Aviv, which would be a continuation of the war, or a continuation of the same rather. But perhaps Hamas's capabilities right now have been so degraded that they are not able to retaliate directly for the killing of their top military commander. And what this signifies, whether it's this response by the Houthis came in response to the killing of the senior Hezbollah commanders or Mohammed Daoud or both, is the increased regional integration, this unification of the fronts that the resistance axis has been talking about for some time now, such that an attack on one is an attack on all, and the response can come from any one of these partners. And where one particular partner is not able to, for whatever reason, to retaliate in kind, another partner which is able to do so can pick up the slack. This has been the strategy for some time, which actually threw the Israelis off at the outset of this conflict. If we recall, National Security Advisor Tzachi Negbi's first press briefing after October 7th, this seems to be what caught them off guard, what caught the Israelis off guard with Gaza itself, where the misperception was that Hamas had internalized the lessons of the beating that the Israelis gave them in May of 2021, and that's why they remained out of the rounds of fighting in 2022 and 2023 between Israel and Pidge, whereas really Pidge just could take more of that beating, and Hamas was being held in reserve. And to me, it seems like the Israelis are still treating this like a game of whack-a-mole, or perhaps they're being forced to because their broader partners, the West, are not looking at this as an increasingly integrated regional assault on Israel, rather than just Israel versus Hamas or Israel versus Hezbollah. This is a comprehensive and interlocking war that the resistance axis is waging. Now, there's another element to this. to this drone strike. As Israel's victory, and again, total victory is going to come through a slow erosion, attrition process against Hamas. But as that is perhaps approaching, the other side, the resistance axis, needs a victory image for its own base to justify continuing this long war against Israel to their own base. Now, the Houthis being able to strike in Tel Aviv is going to be perceived, even though militarily it's not necessarily significant, it's going to be perceived as this part of this victory through increments. That we were not able to, as the resistance axis, to strike Tel Aviv before. This time we were, from Yemen. And if you will be patient, our supporters, we will be able to do further in 5 years. So whatever the price that we're paying now, it's going to pay off in the long run. Even if we lose Hamas now, or lose Gaza as part of this ring of fire, we were able to strike Tel Aviv from Yemen, and we will continue to do so. There's also an element of this psychological warfare that's directed at the Israeli public, which is, I mean, this goes to what Jonathan was talking about, that Tel Aviv has been a virtually impregnable fortress during this conflict, and has generally been immune whenever one of these resistance axis militias and the Israelis have a round of fighting. This broke that seal of immunity. And this furthers the resistance axis, the psychological element of their long war against the Israelis, which is in part to normalize violence as part of Israeli daily life, that if you are going to live in this land, you are going to have to accept that violence is part of your day-to-day life. And the second part of it, and I think this is the most critical part of it, is that your security establishment cannot protect you. And not only, and the demonstration of this is that we can reach the heart of Tel Aviv at a critical intersection, and this is just the case. So part of this is to erode Israeli morale and grant themselves this image of victory. And with that, I will turn back to the Q&A.
Oh, Joe, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, David and Richard and Jonathan, for your comments and setting the stage there. We'll move it over to Q&A now. Just a reminder that you can submit your questions 2 ways. You can do the raise hand feature, or you could submit it via the chat feature. And we do have 2 questions in from Brady Knox at the Washington Examiner. We'll ask the first one. Though any loss of life is tragic, the IDF's total killed in action in Gaza during the current war, mounting to just 325, is remarkably low. What explains Hamas's poor combat performance, despite preparing for such a war for many years, and the cluttered Gaza Strip serving as an ideal location for urban defense? I'll throw that out to Jonathan, as perhaps this was something you addressed in the previous conflict.
Yeah, look, I'm sure my colleagues have thoughts too. I'll just say this, that first of all, the Israelis have incredible intelligence. It has been eroded to a certain extent because of the destruction wrought by the war. So some of the ways in which they were able to listen or watch, may be diminished, but they have a pretty solid view of what's going on inside Gaza. They are able to look around the corner. They're a high-tech military, so they've got drones in the air, they've got satellites, they've got weapons that have supremacy over their enemies. And as well-trained as Hamas is for a terrorist organization, it is no match for an army of Israel's stature. So, I think, this was sort of a matter of time. And again, I believe that now that the Israelis appear to have cut off their supply lines, and they've been getting the better of them in just about every clash that we've seen in the Gaza Strip, it does convey, I think, a sense of inevitability here. Now, inevitability maybe in 2 weeks or in 2 months or maybe even longer, but one does get a sense that the tide's turning. But really, I think you could have probably gotten a sense that things were going well for the Israelis just by the numbers that you cite, that it is extremely low. I still recall the first month or two as the Israelis were kind of formulating their battle plan before going into Gaza. All of the experts predicted that there would be thousands of Israeli casualties and that the Israelis would be mired in the sort of mud of Gaza and that they would never get out of this war. Well, I think they've been proven wrong, but let's see how the next couple of weeks go.
Did they learn along the way, Jonathan and Rich? The
Did
IDF.
Hamas learn along the way?
IDF.
Oh, the IDF.
Especially a ton of
I mean,
warfare.
yeah, for anyone that has actually, tracked the IDF's evolution over time, the chain of command is not necessarily hierarchical, especially during wartime. And so, they were making adjustments on the fly. Commanders on the ground were adjusting their battle plans that had been dictated to them by their commanders back in headquarters. It has been an ongoing evolution for the Israelis, and that's one of the reasons why they are an effective fighting force. But again, I'm happy to have my colleagues weigh in if I've missed anything.
I'd just say on the fighting innovations on the battlefield since October 7th, we've heard a lot of stories, some anecdotal, some reported, on just, you had a massive number of reservists coming out of high tech, coming out of various sectors of Israel's economy in the early days of the war. And a lot of things were not ready for this type of sustained ground operation. And things were updated on the fly. And so the integration, the tactical use of drones in these ground maneuvers was developed and just honed in on as the course of the war unfolded. And I think the drone piece has really proven quite pivotal in the reason why they've been so successful in a lot of these ground maneuvers. The other piece I would just remind people is, there are thousands of IDF soldiers who have been injured. So while the number on the death is smaller relative, but there are a good number of injuries that range in different scale. And so I think another piece of this is the field medicine that is just really good on the Israeli side, and the ability to evacuate the injured very quickly to specialized hospitals that are ready to have an intake and to save people's lives, limbs, all kinds of things. There's a lot of recovery going on, a lot of PTSD issues, a lot of people without limbs and burn victims, and all kinds of stuff happening. And you hear about these stories of rehabilitation, but I think field medicine and drone integration into ground maneuvers are two big reasons for the casualty number you're talking about.
Thanks, Rich. Brady, we're going to come back to your second question in a moment, but Trudy Rubin of the Philadelphia Inquirer has her hand raised. So Trudy, we're going to unmute you and over to you for your question, please.
Sure. Thanks very much. In listening to the discussion, I have yet to hear from anyone, not just on this Zoom, but frankly, anyone, on a realistic proposal for the day after and who's going to govern. I mean, all the options are thrown out, but they're all shot down. It's not going to be the PA for all the reasons that have been expressed here and more. It's if you rule out Qatar and Turkey for similar reasons, they were the financiers, the payrollers, and the cement providers. So, it's one of the reasons why Netanyahu allowed Qatar to finance, to buy them off. So if you rule them out, who is going to rebuild the Strip? I mean, surely the Saudis are not going to plunge headfirst into this. And the idea that however many reasons you can put forward for why someone might want to do this, the idea that UNRWA is going to be ruled out, where does anyone think the people are going to come from? The structure is going to come from. So it looks pretty much like you're going to have a sustained Israeli occupation, even if all of the IDF is not inside the Strip. And you're going to have another civil administration because there ain't going to be anyone else to do it. And we know that the IDF is exhausted. And you've been describing all the other fronts that could open. And I've spent a lot of time in Ukraine, just came back recently. Drone warfare is the future. And cheap long-range drones are going to be harder and harder to counter. You can't just fire Patriots at them. So it seems to me people have to start looking at worst-case scenarios here. I mean, who is going to govern Gaza if it's going to be a long-term occupation with no political horizon? And if you can't drive all the Gazans out to Egypt, nor can you drive all the West Bankers into Jordan, how is this all going to be controlled? I know this is a huge question, but it seems to me that the discussion today is just skirting around the realities. So I would love to hear somebody put forward a scenario of how realistically Gaza is going to be governed, not to mention the West Bank, drones, the Houthis, etc.
So, Sharif, first of all, thank you, and good to hear from someone who's dedicated all their writing to Philadelphians. I'm going to make a quick observation, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues, who I'm sure will have other things to say. I've never believed that a viable day after scenario was possible until the end of major fighting. In other words, you cannot expect the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Europeans, or even the United States to have any sense of what kind of commitment would be necessary, financial forces, or any other kind of material that they would bring to bear, without knowing what the end state looked like. And I think that, quite frankly, the engagement that we've had with the Gulf states, they've wanted to stay out of it because they don't want to look like they're cheering for Israel to win. But once Israel wins, and they realize that there's an opportunity to exert a certain amount of influence and to be leaders in the region, I think we can expect them to step up in some shape or form. Now, do they underwrite the whole thing? I don't know. Are they willing to put, to risk life and limb? Probably not. Are they willing to put money into this and to try to invest in an outcome that would be positive or more positive for the region and have, less Iranian influence? I suspect that is something that we'll see. But again, you cannot expect anybody to step up and say, I'm going to do this right now while Israel is still fighting, while there is still talk about the destruction of the Zionist entity. They cannot, right, for political reasons, insert themselves. But I do think that if this war ends, or if just even the fighting in Gaza ends, and there is a sort of a capitulation or a moment where we understand that Hamas has been defeated, I do think that's, generally speaking, where the space opens up for discussion of truly a day after scenario that's feasible. Right now, it's all theoretical and hard to line up.
David, go ahead.
If I'll be frank, I don't know if I see a day after scenario that doesn't involve some kind of Israeli security involvement. The issue with the partners or the potential security arrangements that would involve someone besides the Israelis, there are two. There's, first of all, competence and whether you can trust the force that would either govern Gaza internally or control the borders. With Egypt, the tunnels under the Philadelphia corridor. I mean, this is something that the Egyptians should have controlled. This is something that contributed to Hamas's capabilities leading up to October 7th. I don't see the Israelis, given failure of the disengagement in 2005 to bring security all the way up to October 7th, given the experience with South Lebanon, where you have the Lebanese armed forces and the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon unable to enforce Resolution 1701's terms. I think it's something the Israelis have come to a realization, perhaps, that they cannot trust anyone else with their security. So there's an issue of what is the most competent force that can control this and the trustworthy force. Jonathan touched on the issue of the Emiratis and the Saudis, perhaps, coming in. I could see them coming in financially. Once someone else is controlling the security, the security of the Gaza Strip. But there are two elements here that are at issue. One is that what Jonathan raised is that they don't want to be perceived as acting as Israel's security guards. This could lead to domestic pressure. This could give Iran a card to play against them. And it's something that they're sensitive to begin with. You don't want to be perceived as liquidating the Palestinian cause, which post October 7th has demonstrated still is very viable in the Arab Sunni streets. Um, the second part of it is they don't want to invest their money, and this is something I've heard from them personally. They don't want to invest their money in something that could be broken again. If there is not a credible security guarantee to prevent the reemergence of Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or some kind of successor organization, the way they're looking at this is they're going to rebuild Gaza, invest all this money only for a future war to happen, and then we're back in the same situation. So in terms of the competence of the force and the trustworthiness of the force, I don't see an alternative to the Israelis, unfortunately. Now, the issue is, from the optics perspective, can the Arab partners that would then invest in Gaza accept an Israeli security role on the Philadelphia corridor, which I don't see an alternative to that. I simply do not see the Israelis giving back to the Egyptians sole responsibility for controlling Philadelphia or for the other entry points into Gaza. So the blockade maybe that Israel has had in Gaza maybe become more extensive, but also more invisible in certain ways. You might have more financial aid, but it is going to have to be premised on this idea that Israel controls security, at least externally. To what degree it controls internally with the PA remains to be seen, but I think that's going to be a critical element of any day after plan.
Rich.
Yeah, listen, so first of all, it's an excellent question. It's the question to be asking. And I don't think it's actually that hard to provide the answers. And I'm happy to do it. And I've laid it out in some pieces. Number one, as long as the money is there and it's non-Qatari Turkish money, and I absolutely believe that if there is a plan, if there is some sort of a victory, if Hamas is no longer there, the population believes Hamas is sort of out of the picture, is willing to work with some sort of new apparatus, the money will be there from the Gulf alongside a whole bunch of other countries that have pledged all kinds of money for all kinds of things over many, many years, donor trust funds and fundraisers and the World Bank kicking in. And, however you want to find a lot of money for reconstruction in Gaza, the money will be there. My view is if the Saudis are at the table and the Emiratis are at the table and you exclude the Qataris and the Turks, the Saudis and the Emiratis will insist on de-radicalization tied to the money from the mosques and the schools, which is going to be critical for sustained longevity of whatever is going to happen in Gaza, just from a society perspective and the government perspective. That said, with money, you then say, okay, what are we going to do with this money? How are we going to create the structures that you need that are non-Hamas, that exclude Hamas and its allies, et cetera, and provide for security? Okay, well, you need police, you need jailers. Like there's just basic things of a society that need to keep going. Otherwise, you have complete chaos. And right now, these people are technically employees of a Hamas government. That does not mean that they're all Hamas. Doesn't mean that they're hardened Hamas fighters or ideologues. Could be some of them at the leadership level, but not all of them. And so the first thing is remember is I've never heard any Israeli planner in my conversations, and certainly here in the United States, think of something when we say defeat Hamas as de-Baathification, as de-Hamasification. That if anybody worked in the Hamas government, they're excluded from life after Hamas being in charge of Gaza. If you work in any civil society area in Gaza, you're working for Hamas. That doesn't make you Hamas necessarily as a hardened Hamas ideologue. Okay. So if you assume that the Shin Bet, others have been working overtime for 9 months, you should never assume things, obviously, but there's a good reason to believe this has been going on, to evaluate all the people who are on the civil rolls and figure out, who is actually like Hamas, can't ever be part of this, needs to be prosecuted or exiled or just whatever, versus the masses who are just civil servants who will work wherever there's a paycheck. Okay, these people have experience. These people can run the water here. These people can run the utilities here. These people can run the police force. These people can run the jails. They know these people are going to run the garbage system, whatever it is. And then you actually have municipalities. And those municipalities take responsibility for all the things the municipalities do. That leads to the issue of UNRWA. Why would you have the UN run schools? That's a municipal function. That's an administrative function. It's a state function. Why would they run hospitals? Why would they run anything? These are not things that you need a UN agency to do. You need technical experts and financial support to train, provide bridging services, emergency critical life-saving services during crisis to get you to the next step, and then transition to the people who will actually be in charge of these things. That's why it's absolutely mandatory to move away from the UNRWA model. And to say you can't do it, it's not true. I just published with Bonnie Glick, with the help of many experts in the space. We'll send you it. I'll put a copy in the chat maybe. The alternatives, how you move away from UNRWA. There's an alphabet soup of organizations available to fill every single service that UNRWA provides and do it on a regular basis in crises around the world for IDPs, internally displaced persons, and refugees, with the idea being we're going to go in and we're going to get out. We're going to turn it back over to the people when the crisis has averted, train people, get people through the crisis, and then we're not supposed to be here doing the service of a municipality, of a state. That's up to the people. So if all of this is being done together, and I can't predict how long this would take, and the IDF provides the overall counterterrorism security to be able to go in and out as Hamas cells keep trying to pop up, as Islamic Jihad cells keep trying to pop up. You block the smuggling routes to make sure they're cut off from weapons resupplies and other things out of the Gaza-Egypt border. You do have a pretty good model of how to move forward here. It's not that scary. It's not impossible. Is it easy? No. Are there going to be a lot of speed bumps? Yes. Could it absolutely fail? Absolutely. But to me, that is the series of least worst options that produce the best possible result.
Thanks, Rich. We have several questions lined up. I'm going to ask two of them now. The first from Ben Avansky. Given Galant's comments today, do you think the Israelis will retaliate against the Houthis? And then Brady Knox, if Israel decides to invade Lebanon, when do you believe such an invasion will take place, and what is the rough percentage likelihood of such an invasion? And then we got several more after that. Sorry, Galant's questions.
Go ahead.
I'll take the Lebanon question and then turn over. It's hard to say. I always hate to play prophet on these things. I don't see this a Lebanon invasion necessarily happening within the next month or so. I think the Israelis need to have a refractory period for their army, restock, perhaps assess, given the destructiveness or the expected destructiveness, destructive impact of this war on Israel's home front, harden critical infrastructure against Hezbollah's weapons, restock weapons from the United States, perhaps allow the international temperature that has risen against Israel over the Gaza war to die down a little bit. So it could take some time for these things to be put into place, and also laying down plans for an invasion and contingency plans for what happens, as Jonathan mentioned earlier. Even if your intention is to enter into South Lebanon, the IDF, and destroy Hezbollah's assets to the extent possible there, it's not guaranteed that this will remain confined to South Lebanon. Let's not forget that Hezbollah has infrastructure in Lebanon as deep as northern Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley, and they've been entrenching in Syria for several years now, which could very well act as the strategic depth for Hezbollah. So how much contingency plans do you have to lay for that? What are the weapons you're going to need? What are the number of forces that you're going to need for that? All these things are going to be taken into consideration, and they need time.
On the Yemen question, I do believe that Israel will respond at a time of its choosing. I believe they should respond. To go back to the caveat I raised, we don't have a complete picture on where the gaps may exist in Israeli air defense. They're not going to tell us that. And if you do sort of work on an assumption, which I have based on various things that I see, that a large number of drones together would get picked up by Israeli air defense, that this is, I don't want to say symbolic, but it was a reach out and touch for strategic purposes rather than an actual sustained assault from Yemen. And if the Israelis have confidence that sort of over the long run, they'll be able to defeat a threat from Yemen if the Houthis try to keep using this tactic, they might not get every one of them, but anything that would be a large scale assault, something that's more strategic in nature. We've already seen them take down cruise missiles, take down ballistic missiles coming at a lot. We've seen them take down other drones before. Versus Israel's capability, if they can demonstrate to the Houthi leadership an ability to reach out and touch them at any time of their choosing in a way that the Houthis can't defend against, and that could threaten leadership assets, could threaten something more critical, and the Iranians on the ground there as well, I would imagine they would want to try to seek to change the dynamic, to send that message of, you think you did something to us last night, you think you did something to us in Tel Aviv here and sent us a message. Let us assure you we can send you a message times 100 if you want to play this game. So that was what I would expect. There's also other targets available. Remember, they have an Air Force. We've seen them have standoff capability to be able to even get into Iran. So I'm pretty confident that their Air Force can reach Yemen. They have drone capability as well if they wanted to explore that. And they obviously have a naval special warfare capability as well. And you've seen them operate in the Red Sea before. So if they want to go touch the Houthis in Yemen, if they want to touch the Iranian support to the Houthis in Yemen, they can do that.
Related to the Houthis, I'm going to ask this question from Ashley. And Ashley, I also might connect you separately with Benjamin Talablu, FDD Senior Fellow. Ashley's question, can you provide some insight background into the Houthis' drone capabilities? The Houthis say they used a new Jaffa drone. There's some questions about whether they actually have the capability to launch a drone that can go the distance that it did. Was this drone strike out of left field? Is it surprising given how David said they've been focused on targeting shipping?
So let me just say, you should speak to Behnam Ben Talablu to talk about the variant of the drone and the previous distance that it was believed to be able to travel and how it may have extended, the adjustments that were likely made by Iranian engineers. I think there's a lot of technical components to this, and I think we'd be very happy to put you in touch with Behnam, who is far and away the guy that you should speak to on this. I would just say here that this drone strike was out of left field. It was a surprise to, I think, everyone, certainly to the Israelis. I don't think they expected this capability. I mean, I got to say, when you look back at what the Houthis were doing, 3 or 4 years ago, it looked like a ragtag group of fighters with minimal training, didn't have the kind of capabilities that we see on display. The ballistic missiles that they fired at a lot. The distance and even the accuracy, I think, has surprised a lot of people. This drone capability is the newest tier 2. I will just say that from all indications right now, it appears that the Islamic Republic is using Yemen as a laboratory for testing out some of its capabilities. I don't think that's a surprise. This is exactly what proxy warfare is all about. And again, I would just circle back to the point here is that Iran is waging this war. It is a multi-front conflict. There are multiple proxies that Iran is directing. And that, I think, really is the key headline, the key takeaway from what happened last night and what's been going on in the north, especially as we potentially see the winding down of the Gaza front and we see the heating up of these other fronts. I think it gives you a sense of what this war was about from the get-go. The technical components of this, we can get you the right people to understand exactly what was tweaked, what was changed, what happened. But I think, kind of taking a step back and looking at the broader picture, one does get the sense that Iran is heavily involved and figures to be heavily involved as long as the fighting continues.
Jonathan, Gabby Deutsch asks if FTO designation of the Houthis might be forthcoming now as a result, and what kind of influence impact that might have.
I don't know. I mean, I'll defer to Rich on this. I'll just say I can't see the administration wanting to do this in reverse course right now with all the other challenges that it's dealing with. Politically, this just seems like an admission of guilt or an admission of wrongdoing from, the initial decision that was made. I can't imagine the Biden administration would carve out the time and energy to do this right now. That's my gut instinct, but maybe Rich has another thought. He and I have both written on this topic.
Yeah.
No, I mean, listen, the Houthis on an almost daily basis are sending the same kind of drone, maybe the mod, one below the Samad 2. This has been the Samad 3, though I think we've seen the Samad 3 attack a U.S. Navy destroyer over the last few months. they're attacking the Red Sea on a daily basis. The U.S. Navy, commercial shipping, missile attacks, both anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, all kinds of drones. We're seeing them now deploying surface vehicles, autonomous surface vehicles, underwater vehicles, which are the surface vehicles are actually causing more damage than the missiles now. We saw a tanker go down in the Red Sea over this. So that has not prompted the administration to add them back to the foreign terrorist organization list. I can't imagine this would be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Why have they not done that, by the way? They rolled out some sanctions this week, and they're trying to squeeze the resources for the Houthis through financial sanctions, very targeted in nature. They're probably not going to do very much. The reason is they don't want to cut off the financial spigots to the Houthis. They want to say that they're targeting the financial spigots of the illicit activities of the Houthis while allowing economic aid to go to the Houthis, whether the Saudis are delivering that through their truce deal that they cut last year or from the UN. And if they were to put them back on the FTO list, that would create issues for economic support as part of still this ongoing political process where the administration's policy is to bring the Houthis into the fold and legitimize them as part of a future government of Yemen. That is why they are not on the FTO list today.
Can the Houthis be part of the government in Yemen? Should they be?
You're asking
Look,
me?
I don't believe so. I'll just say, that there's no room for it. That's essentially we're talking about a recipe for another Lebanon, basically having an Iran proxy take over, part or all of a state. I think we're already there to some extent, but the idea of normalizing it should not occur. You get a sense of how devastating that can be to a country when you look at the complete collapse of Lebanon right now, the debt, the political gridlock, the mess that has occurred by allowing and normalizing an Iran proxy to gain a stranglehold over the country. So cautionary tale with Lebanon. You don't need another fail. I mean, Yemen is not exactly a successful state, hasn't been one for quite some time, but the idea of having another failed state under the control or under the sway of Iran seems like a really bad idea. Even if we're partially there, we should be still trying to fight for whatever's left.
And I would just say, when we go back to the Quad and the UK and the US working with the GCC coalition partners and the Saudis and the Emiratis, looking at what was going to come next in Yemen and what that government could look like and whether or not you could fold in the Houthis in some way. Those conversations occurred in the context of an ongoing war led by the Saudis and Emiratis against the Houthis and trying to inflict as much damage as they could onto Houthi leadership to the point where they got actual concessions, change in behavior, cut off of access to the Iranians, demilitarization, all kinds of things in the hopes that that somehow would produce a political settlement. We're not in that context anymore. Now it's been accepted because of our Iran policy over these last few years, and the Saudis and the Emiratis looking around saying, well, there's no cavalry coming, there's no defenses here. The U.S. is pumping the Iranians with sanctions relief. They've taken the Houthis off the FTO list. Abu Dhabi's under attack. Jeddah's under attack. Nobody's coming to our aid. We got to cut our own deals here. They've decided, we cut off intelligence support to the war. We basically strangled them to have to end military operations. So they had to cut their deal here, and they've legitimized the Houthis as they are, which is a client of the Iranians. And so if you're now sort of fast forwarding and say, oh, well, we were willing to have discussions, 4 years ago, 5 years ago about what it would look like in a political settlement, so let's just pick right up now and just bring the Houthis back in the fold. We'll just pay them to act nicely, which is basically the concept on the table. You're in like some kind of a JCPOA with the Houthis. I mean, it's like worse than Lebanon. I mean, it's a disaster in waiting. Either they're a terrorist group or they're not a terrorist group. We got to make up our minds here. I think they're a terrorist group. They have no role in the future of a stable Yemen.
Back to Gaza, Peter Aitken asks, with the superior intel operations Israel had prior to going into Gaza after October 7th and the deep integration of AI in IDF operations, why did Israel not take a more precise approach to hitting Hamas targets throughout the conflict, or alternatively, to more easily locate and retrieve the hostages in a shorter time period? And we'll wrap up with that question.
Yeah, I'm going to take a first stab at this, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues while I hop off because I've got a sort of a hard stop. Look, the superior intelligence has only taken the Israelis so far, primarily because Hamas has used the hostages as human shields. In other words, the senior leaders, we know this, they've been surrounded by hostages, making it harder for the Israelis to strike at the leadership. In fact, as we understand it, the Israelis have been deterred at least 2 times from taking out Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, who launched this war, primarily because he has surrounded himself with, from what we understand, somewhere around a dozen or a dozen and a half different hostages. So I think that's been part of it. The AI component of all of this, I think, has been a bit overblown, at least as I understand it. AI continues to help generate an understanding for the Israelis of where their enemy may be and sort of how to locate them. But AI itself cannot be the strike package. In other words, they cannot work only off of that. They've been trying to use the information that AI provides and pair it with human or other kinds of intelligence before taking action. That's the responsible thing to do. It's what you would expect an army of Israel stature. That's what you would expect them, the kinds of policies that they should implement. That may change over time as AI is weaponized further, but at least as I understand it right now, it's one tool among many, and it's still limited because they're still getting a handle on how accurate and what kinds of information it can provide. I need to go here, but certainly I encourage you to hear the comments of my colleagues, but I thank you for joining and apologies for jumping off so soon.
Thanks, Jonathan. Greatly appreciate it. Richard, thank you for joining us. David, thank you as well. To the reporters on the call, thank you for participating. A reminder that FDD is a nonpartisan research institute focused on national security and foreign policy. We do closely monitor our email at press@FDD. Please reach out to us if you'd like to arrange a separate conversation with any of the 3 guests that we just had. Special shout out to Marian Waba, who handled all of the great logistics in the background. Please email us anytime. Be happy to help you. Otherwise, we'll end the call here. This does conclude our call.